I welcome you all for today's program. Myself, Dr. C.N. Patil, I'm medical oncologist at Apollo Hospitals, Bangalore. We're all meeting after a long time, and COVID-19 is far from gone. I think it's going to stay with us, and we are going to stay with COVID, and we have to get along and continue our lives. So today's CME, we thought we'll do it in a unique way, rather than having didactic talks, because generally by the time we start, it's already 8:30, 9 o'clock in the evening. And if didactic talks are there and each person takes 30 minutes, then we'll not be able to cover most of the topics. And didactic talks are generally boring. So we thought we'll do panel discussion and also answer your queries, and all our elite panelists will answer your questions, what you have. You must have encountered so many problems while dealing with malignancies, and you must be having a lot of queries regarding screening, vaccination, and then management of certain malignancies. So we thought we will have a panel discussion, and I will moderate the session. So may I request all our panelists to come on the dais. Dr. Jayanti Tumsi, consultant breast surgeon at Apollo Hospitals, Bangalore. Dr. Rani Bhatt, consultant gynec oncologist at Apollo Hospitals, Bangalore. Dr. Narsimha Srinivasaya, consultant colorectal surgeon at Apollo Hospitals, Bangalore. Dr. Sunil, consultant oncosurgeon at Apollo Hospitals, Bangalore. And Dr. Vinay Ural, radiation oncologist at Apollo Hospitals, Bangalore. So we have an elite panel, and organ specific discussion also we can do. And we'll cover some aspects of radiation oncology, surgical oncology, medical oncology, gynae oncology, and breast oncology, and GI oncology. So in 30 minutes or 45 minutes or so,
and pick up the malignancy in the younger age group, which can be much more damaging compared with the malignancy in the elderly.
Definitely. In India, 48% of breast cancer happens in women who are less than 50 years, and quite a number of them happen in women who are less than 40 years. And when breast cancer happens in a younger women, there are many more issues that we have to deal with. So first of all, diagnosis itself is difficult because imaging options are very less, and there is low level of suspicion. And in younger women, there are other issues because they might have premature amenorrhea. Many of them might not have completed their families. Fertility becomes an issue. Future family is an issue. So there are many more things that we have to deal with when there is a younger patient who develops breast cancer.
Yeah, so we have discussed enough about screening. So generally in India, the take-home point is there is no screening program as such for the population because of our sheer population and lack of infrastructure and lack of expertise. Suppose we do mammogram for our whole population, what we do generally is only opportunistic screening. People who are aware, who want to do get themselves checked, we do mammogram. But as a policy or government decision, we don't have a program, screening program in India, because of our sheer population. Suppose we do mammogram and we do not interpret them properly, and there is no point in doing it, because mammogram we generally pick up DCIS or LCIS, that is ductal carcinoma in situ, pre-invasive stage. So if we don't pick it up, then the purpose itself is not served. So what we generally do is only opportunistic screening in India. So, and it has not percolated, and because of our infrastructure and the population what we have. So in breast cancer, we'll come back again to Dr. Jayanti Tumsi regarding the other recent updates in breast cancer management, because today's theme is recent updates in oncology. We'll move to gynec oncology. My question is to Dr. Rani Bhatt. So generally we have a lot of discussion nowadays about vaccination. That is all, when now vaccination means it's COVID-19 vaccination, but there is one more vaccination to prevent cancer. We do not have many vaccines to prevent cancer. One is hepatitis B vaccine to prevent HCC, but there is one remarkable vaccine, HPV vaccine, which can prevent cervical cancer. And again, it's again a controversial area. Some people are believers and people are not believers. And again, there is huge controversy even in the international arena, and whether it should be done, and if it has to be done, at what age it should be done, and what are the vaccines which are available, and what's your take on the vaccine, and what's the recommendation, ma'am?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Patil, and thank you everybody for being here. As he rightly said, these days we're just concerned about the COVID vaccine. But unfortunately, you know, we have one vaccine to prevent the cancer, which is the human papilloma virus vaccine. And this has been in the market, and it has been proven enough Because I still remember first time when I went to Melbourne in 2006. That is when the Australian government had kind of like set up a regulation saying that all school going girls should be getting the vaccination. So that was the government policy, and now Australia is almost talking about eradicating HPV virus, and the pre-invasive lesions are dramatically coming down, and they credit it to the HPV vaccine. So as you rightly said, like always in our medical profession, there will be two schools of thoughts. One is for and one is against. I really do not see in the literature anybody talking so much against of the HPV virus. It's only that like, at what age to be given. Initially when the HPV virus came in, and what they said is the best age to be given is before the girl is sexually active. And then the recommendation came saying that, you can give as early as 9 years. You start off from 9 years, but the best time will be from 11 years onwards. Between 11 to 15, if a girl is getting a vaccination, you just need to give 2 doses. But after 15 years, until like you're about 25, you give 3 doses. So best time to start is 11 to 15, you give only 2 doses. And after 15 till 25, you give 3 doses. So when the vaccine came in, and when they said it is best to be given before a girl is sexually active, even in the Western countries, there were a lot of resistance, because parents felt that by giving this HPV vaccine, they were giving a green signal to the child, saying that you're all safe to have a sexual intercourse. But that is a very wrong thing, because believe me, the best time to be given is before a lady is sexually active. Now, so many patients, they do come and ask, especially like when we educate them, saying like, I am already married, I have 1 kid, can I still take the vaccine? As I said, the HPV virus is a sexually transmitted disease. So once the sexual activity happens, that means they already harbor HPV virus in them. Now, if you take a vaccine, it's important to remember that that vaccine will not take care of the virus which is already there in the body, but it will surely prevent further HPV virus. Now, we know this HPV virus are mainly targeted to the 2 strains of virus. Now, we have one more vaccine where they target for the 4 strains which causes the virus and also the genital papilloma. Now, these 2 strains are the most dangerous one. The studies have shown, though we know HPV, there are hundreds of strains, though they target only these 2 strains, there is a cross protection to the other strains also. So very simple, my take home message, I strongly promote HPV virus vaccination for all young girls. And believe me, even for boys, the international guidelines recommends even for boys, because we do know HPV virus not only causes cervical cancer, it also causes genital cancer both in males and females, penile cancer in males, head and neck cancer in both the sexes. So obviously, HPV caused head and neck, external genitalia both in males and females, and I'm sure this vaccination will bring down that incidence. So I'm strongly for HPV vaccination. So please educate your patients and tell them the best time to be given is before being sexually active.
That is the age to start the vaccine at the age of 9 years or 10 years. It is as per the Western literature. It is their habits and their sexual contact and their sexual life. It is entirely different compared with the sexual behavior of Indian girls or Indian women. So are we justified in blindly copying whatever those people are doing? Because the sexual exposure to Indian girls or Indian boys and girls is not that early age, because it is generally, most of them it is after marriage. So are we justified in promoting this at the age of menarche? So looks like we need the vaccine not at 9 years or 10 years of age, maybe after marriage, because most of these uterine malignancies start in the age of say 35 or 40 years and above. So why not give this around 30 or 35 years of age, maybe after marriage or before pregnancy? Why not shift the time to the time suitable for Indian conditions? Why to copy what those people are doing? It looks very strange and funny to me.
So I'll take it in 2 ways. One, when we look about cervical cancer screening, the Western, the guidelines what we have is like we say you start from the age of 25 and till 30 you keep screening them. Now, as you rightly said, you know, some girls may not even be married at the age of 25. So obviously, to a virgin lady, you can't say like, you know, you need to have a pap smear. So we generally recommend, what I generally tell in my talks is that 3 years after being married or sexually activity, you have your first pap smear. So that is, yes, because pap smear is an invasive test, like obviously you cannot ask a virgin to have a pap smear test. Now coming to the vaccination. Now unfortunately, sir, if we really look, we really do not have the data. What is the sexual activity of our Indian population, at what age it starts? When you see in our big cities, we do see, you know, so much of news going around, what's happening in the school, what's happening in young kids. So our kids do mimic the Western culture, be it the way they dress up, be it the way they speak, whatever it is. Yes, it is coming to our Indian culture that many of young boys and girls are being sexually in relationship much before even the legal age to be. So we cannot say like, you know, we should keep a marriage as a thing. Now, why is that they've said that, you know, you start off, I'm sure even in the Western world, if you look at, it's the teenage age group, like when they go into higher school is when they get into the sexual activity. But why is the 9 and 11 is that they are looking at the immune system, like what these young people will have, the response, what they have to this virus is what they're looking at. So that is why they've come to that age. So I really don't think it is anything related to the sexual activity. It is a protection what we're just giving them. We are safe, ensuring our children are safe. Unfortunately, yes, they're good, they wait until their marriage, well and good. But if not, at least, you know, they're protected.
Madam, the problem is if a 9 years girl has come to me I am a pediatrician also, I give them various vaccines. If I taught, speaking to the parents that I'm giving a vaccine to prevent malignancy in this girl, they start scratching their head. What is this doctor talking about? He's talking about cancer to my daughter. Why so early? They start wondering. So my point is, do you have any cutoff age? Say like 40 years and above, you can't give this. Or below that, do you have the elderly age group or the middle age? What is your cutoff age? Because it is difficult to promote cervical cancer vaccine at the age of 9 or 10 years. Difficult to convince the parents. I'm giving vaccine to prevent the cancer. Small girl, just now she started schooling. So what is the cutoff age? Somebody aged about 40 years interested in taking vaccine. Can we give vaccine to that lady?
No, sir. As I said, 35 is the upper limit. The literature, what they generally say is like 26. But in our Indian thing, we do say like, okay, fine, 35. But that is the upper limit. But, sir, the most important part why our India is still having such huge number of cervical cancer is two reasons. One, lack of education, lack of awareness. So that is, even when, to be very honest, one of my colleague who's a microbiologist recently, just 2 days back, she called me to discuss about some report, and we just got to talk about this vaccine. So when I was discussing with her, she said, why is that, like, Dr. Rani, we do not know about this? She's a microbiologist in a cancer center, like, you know, she herself wasn't aware of it. So that is lack of awareness. I'm sure if we communicate to the mother and tell that, look, every sexually active lady is at risk of developing cancer, cervical cancer. This is the best way for us to prevent. I'm sure education goes a long way. So no wonder when we look between developed country and developing country, it is the lack of education. I think the incidence of the cervical cancer is still very high, and the deaths due to cervical cancer, we are still leading.
Does it need a gynec checkup lady 35 years before giving the vaccine?
No, sir. You don't need any gynae checkup. As I said, we are giving it to young girls. You don't need any checkup. Even if after being sexually active, if somebody comes forward to take the vaccine, you don't have to do any vaginal smear to see does she have HPV or no.
35 years lady?
Don't need anything. Don't need anything. Only thing we need to educate that if she's already sexually active, that she will be surely be having a virus. But this will prevent, but because she has taken this vaccination doesn't mean that she needs to stop going for the pap smear test. That's the most important thing to tell.
There are two, no, Cervarix and
Yes, sir, Cervarix and Gardasil. So, Gardasil has 4 and the Cervarix is 2. Now, depending upon, Gardasil, it's 4. So, it prevents the genital warts also. So, what they generally say is, if a lady is already sexually active, so she has the virus, she has not developed the warts, so there is no use of giving the vaccine for that. So, before sexually activity, giving the 4 strains vaccine is always better because it will prevent the genital warts also.
Thank you, ma'am. Always the vaccine and screening always will be very useful, and many people are interested to do discussion about the vaccine and screening. And take-home message is, yes sir, we'll come to you. Take-home message is, this vaccine is recommended, cervical cancer vaccine, and better given before the first sexual exposure between 9 to 18 years of age, and can be given up to the age of 35 years. Having taken vaccine doesn't mean that they should not be doing pap smear. They should still do pap smear. And then the cancer incidence can be brought down, and we'll see the impact after 10 to 15 years. Like the countries like Australia and New Zealand have almost eradicated cervical cancer. That cervical cancer is one cancer which is amenable for screening, and we should be, as a medical fraternity, we should not be seeing any advanced cervical cancer. We continue to do so. We are still continuing to see which should not be the case. Yes, over to you, sir.
HPV vaccination, will it protect against warts of any other areas of the body? Is it only about the say cervix or any other infection anywhere in the body?
Sir, as we just discussed, HPV virus, most of the time we know it is proven that it causes cervical cancer. In addition to that, HPV induced vaginal vulval cancer in women, penile cancer in males, and head and neck HPV induced cancer both in males and females. So obviously, yes, the vaccination will have some kind of protection to these malignancies also.
Yeah, and also,
Especially, madam, subungual warts, viral warts of the subungual area is very difficult to treat. It is a recurrent disease. The person who is having a subungual warts, will you advise them to undergo HPV
No,
vaccination?
sir. No. Because HPV vaccination is not the treatment for the warts.
The person is suffering with subungual warts, they may develop warts of other areas also, like genital.
No, sir. No.
Do you advise them?
No.
if a person is willing and committed to do pap smear every year, can she forego cervical cancer vaccine, or will you still advise, sir?
Okay. I would still advise for the vaccination because yes, it does bring down the incidence of the virus, and because it is not 100% protection for us, still recommend them to have the pap smear vaccine. Now, she doesn't have to have a yearly pap smear vaccination because we have a combined test like where we look for the pap smear and also the HPV virus. If you do this combined test, a lady needs to just come for the pap smear once in 5 years. Doesn't have to come yearly. So if you are doing only pap smear test and not checking for the HPV virus, yes, then you have to do it yearly. But if you're doing a combined test, that is the pap smear and HPV DNA, now it comes as just a simple single test, same thing what you're doing, but it's a liquid based cytology. If you do that, HPV negative, pap smear negative, she comes back after 5 years.
Madam, you said something about HPV vaccine to the male. It is something new. Will you elaborate what exactly is the role?
Sorry, sir?
Male, you said.
In males, sir, it is in the guidelines already saying like even for boys, like how I said from age of 9, even for boys from age of 9, it is recommended because as I said, HPV induced the squamous cell carcinoma of the penis also, it's related to the HPV virus. So, and the head and neck, what they have seen is that obviously people who are engaged in oral sex, like, that could be the reason why the HPV-induced squamous cell carcinoma of the head and neck can happen. So that's the reason why they're saying, yes, it would be advantageous for boys and girls to get HPV vaccine.
But is it practiced? Is it given anywhere to the...
Yes, sir, it's given.
Yeah, it's given.
It's given across the world, only we are lagging behind.
Best way to vaccinate and increase the awareness is to give it to the hands of pediatricians because they are well versed in vaccination, and it can go as a continuum. At the age of 5 years and 10 years, they'll go for tetanus toxoid, and we don't have to scare by telling it as a cancer vaccine, like we don't do it when we give hepatitis B vaccine. We don't tell them that it will prevent cirrhosis and cancer. We tell it is going to prevent hepatitis B viral infection. So we can say that it is going to prevent HPV infection. So then the acceptance rate will be high, and the benefits are huge, and we are going to, if we have to eradicate cervical cancer, the cervical cancer vaccine is the only way to go, because we cannot do pap smear for our population. As a population screening, we cannot do. So we'll change gears here and we'll move to colorectal. Yes, sir has one question. After that, we'll move to the colorectal discussion. Yeah.
Because even the president of Sonia Gandhi had a cervical cancer. They was about to put this vaccination on the national immunization program. Because of the success rate, they not put it into the national immunization program. And whatever you say, this Gardasil and all, this is all educated people who take. The most of the patients are coming from the prostitutes, younger, this one. Those to be targeted, but nobody, this is only educated people who come to the,
Yes.
and they take it. And it is, when you take into this one, the percentage is very low, and giving them who is normal people, just it's eyewash. But the people who are prostitutes, and they are not targeted. Those people are the highest for the cervical cancer.
So it is very well taken. The point is very valid and pertinent. See, the acceptance has to increase, and slowly we should include it in the national immunization schedule. Then only it is going to be successful. As sir said, it's happening only as what we are doing in India in screening and vaccination is only opportunistic screening, opportunistic vaccination. If I am educated, I know about Gardasil, I know about Cervarix, I am already educated and go and take vaccination. If I am educated and taking vaccination, I am already committed to do pap smear too. But as he told, in rural population it has not percolated, in commercial sexual workers it has not percolated. If it has to percolate, it should be like polio drive or hepatitis B vaccination. See, when it came in hepatitis B vaccination, I remember we were in MBBS first year or second year, we took that Engerix, all 10 of us used to take combined, and we had to pay 300 rupees per head. Now it's given almost free. So the percolation has to happen, means it has to come in the national immunization schedule. I remember when I was doing DM residency in 2007, we had an 18th icon in Bhubaneswar, where we discussed this issue, whether it should be included in national immunization schedule or not. So 10 years down the line, we are at least open to discussion, and even people from major cancer centers were against vaccination, if I am not mistaken. But now the acceptance is there, and it is going to take some more time, and the cost has to come down, and the government should be convinced that it is going to be useful. And we do not have so many radiation machines to treat cervical cancer. So instead of that, prevention is the best way forward in cervical cancer. So we'll change gears and move to colorectal discussion.
Madam,
So
before you move on to colorectal, I want a small information from you. Out of all the gynec cancers, what percentage is the cervical cancer? Because endometrial cancer, so many other cancers are there. So what percentage of this gynec cancers is preventable by this vaccine?
So when we look at cervical cancer, there are two types. One is the squamous cell carcinoma, and one is the adenocarcinoma. And of the squamous cell carcinoma, they've seen that almost like up to 70 to 80% of them are HPV induced. So that itself speaks that we can prevent cervical cancer. And if you look at the incidence in gynae malignancies, cervical cancer is still the leading.
in fact, cervical cancer was the leading cause of cancer among women in India. Now breast cancer has overtaken, maybe because of increased awareness and detection, and also increased awareness regarding cervical sexual practices and pap smear acceptance, and to some extent to cervical cancer vaccine. The cervical cancer has come down in India. It's not so high, and the breast cancer is the leading cause of cancer among women in India. So there are a lot of advances in colorectal arena. We hear a lot about robotics and different advances in surgical techniques in colorectal, and C rectum at times is very, very difficult, and we have a lot of controversies in managing upper rectal cancers, rectosigmoid cancers, and in lower rectal cancers, what is the role of anterior chemo RT and then surgery. And there are a lot of issues in managing rectal cancer, and robotics has made inroads in gynec cancers and colorectal surgeries, especially in rectal surgeries and prostate surgeries. So what's your take on robotic surgery, sir? Does it have any advantage, or it is just a show off that is done, or definite advantage is there, or what is your take on robotic surgeries and the evidence what we have?
Thank you, Dr. Patil. If I may ask, can everybody understand Kannada, or is there anybody who would not understand Kannada? Right, okay, lovely. So I think technology is certainly taken a leap in the last 20 years or so. There are two aspects to it. Is it the touch which is important, or is the technology which is important? This is not about surgical skill, which I'll come to in a minute. This is about decision making. This is about patient care. I think as clinicians, what we cannot ignore and forget is the human touch, and that is where I'm grateful to the primary care clinicians who actually spend a lot of time with patients with that human touch. Now, moving on to rectal cancers. Why is it important? I think we talked about robotics, yes, but the country doesn't have robots everywhere. But why is it important to us in this particular era talking about rectal cancers? I think the incidence certainly is on the upward rise. The reasons could be various, predominantly to do with environmental factors, partly genetic factors, our lifestyle habits, and not to forget, we are living longer now. 68 is our lifespan, average lifespan in India. And we are certainly living longer. So I think the cases are increasing, and I think we need to use technology in a justifiable way. If I have to tell you with evidence, is robotic surgery really better than open surgery or laparoscopic surgery? The answer is, in majority of the cases, no. So where is it useful? It is predominantly useful in the pelvic work. What sort of pelvic work? The deep pelvic work, where we are talking about the low rectal cancers, which are present anteriorly, closer to the seminal vesicles, closer to the prostrate. And these tumors are present in males where the pelvis is more of android and very difficult to see. So why is it important for us to use technology like a robot in this? One is for oncological clearance. We all know that an R0 resection is the grail, the holy grail of any oncological surgery. So when we are operating in closed spaces, whether it's gynae, whether it's prostrate, whether it's low rectums, one is the visibility, one is the clarity, and also the visibility of the nerves that we go around. We try to protect them from injury. What we do not actually think about when doing these surgeries is the quality of life of these patients. A robot spending an extra 2 hours on that patient can give a reasonably productive sexual life for the rest of the 20 years of his lifetime. So what we need to think about is that patient who's going through that operation with a reasonable function that has to be protected and maintained. His urinary function, his bowel function, and the sexual function, which becomes an integral part of his quality of life. So you asked me about some evidence with regarding to robotic trials. One of the well-documented trials that came across was something called as a roller trial, a multi-centric, multinational trial that came off Leeds, which was run by a gentleman called as David Jane. Quality was questioned, the outcome measures were questioned, and a lot of the people were in the learning curve. So what they went on to say was, done properly, I don't think, or they didn't think robotics would give a better cutting edge than laparoscopy. But they said it might have benefits in terms of some of the difficult areas in the pelvis, such as at 1 to 3 o'clock, which we call as a blind spot, and that is where recurrences were common when done laparoscopically or open compared to robotic surgery. And secondly, the sexual function was never evaluated and the study was not powered for quality of life such as sexual function. And further on from there, the Swedes have taken over, and Anna, one of the lead authors in a number of papers, has looked into sexual functions. And when we use minimally invasive tools like the robotic tools, the nerve preservation is better, the urinary function is better, the bowel function is reasonably better, and the sexual function certainly scores high. The quality of life is certainly better. But why are we using technology more robustly? Because we think it gives a better outcome, both in terms of returning the patient his quality of life to a reasonable extent, and it is as good as laparoscopy when it comes to oncological resections. Cost is an impeding factor. Return to normal activity, shorter stay, less pain, they're probably comparable to laparoscopy, I would have thought. I hope that answers your question, Dr. Patil.
Sir has succinctly told and threadbare analysis he has done about pros and cons of robotic surgery, and he has clearly told there is no major advantage, but it is preferable if you are looking at pelvic areas and difficult areas where we operate, and also preservation of sexual function, quality of life, and less hospital stay and better quality of life. It has definitely as an edge in prostate surgeries, some gynec malignancies, and rectal surgeries. If we have any question from the audience regarding colorectal.
So this robotic surgery is, you forget the patients, even among the doctors. I graduated 4 decades ago. I am totally ignorant about this robotic surgery. One. And another thing is the availability of the robotic surgery facility is there in very few selected centers. Yes. Even in a major city like Bangalore, maybe 3-4 places it is done. So a large country of 135 crore population, it is not able to reach the masses.
Yes.
So it is there in hardly very few centers. So this technology is welcome, but is it at a very high price? Is it affordable? It is the technological innovation that is welcome, but is it something affordable? Does it make a very big difference to the patient's pocket as far as the expenditure is concerned? The advantage is there, but the expense and those things cannot be justified.
So I think it's a fantastic question. Part of what we need to answer ourselves is the health economics. In Bangalore today, we have about 10 robots working. Hattide sir. Each robot costs about 12 to 15 crores, depending upon the model and the type and whatever. When we actually look at health economics and do an economical model on the patients to say, on the population, are we saving money or are we losing money? There are a lot of studies out there now which say, in fact, we probably, in a long run, save money. Return to normal activity for a patient. Shorter hospital stay. Shorter ICU stay. Decreased incidence of Clavin-Dindo complications 3 and 4, which means return back to theatre, needing IV antibiotics, needing hospitalization, wound infections, wound breakdowns. So if you actually look at all these things, you probably save money. Yes, in a shorter term, it is spending money, but in a long term, it probably saves money. So now moving on to technology. Let us accept it. We all say, time and tide waits for none. So is technology. Whether we accept it or not, we will have to catch up with the technology. Yes, Intuitive, when they came up to the market, they were the holders of patents for all the robotics, quite expensive. Now, the prices are all coming down. There are robots made in India now, which are in the market. British made, Cambridge Robotics is in the market. Medtronic made, robotics into the market now. So I think the prices are certainly coming down. So when we actually work out the logistics of economics, in an hospital, what we are spending is about 60,000 rupees more compared to a laparoscopy. And if you actually tell the patients, because we operate a lot of CGHS patients, ECHS patients, and if you tell them the extra cost incurred is about 45 to 60,000 rupees, majority of the times the hospitals do pay or the CGHS does pay, and patients are more than happy to pick it up. So I think your question is well taken. Yes, it is an expensive affair as of now, but the number of robots are going up. Even places like St. John's are getting it. CMC Vellore has got it. Gem Hospital in Coimbatore has got it. Bangalore has got at least 10 robots. I think with time to come, it is going to play a major role, because for the patients, it's the quality of life. Try telling a 45-year-old male that we will use a robot, and hopefully with a robotic technology, your sexual function will be preserved. He might not say, fantastic doctor, but he'll be happy inside. So I think, yes, there is a cost factor that comes with it. The number of robots are increasing. Different companies are coming to it. And on a balance of the economical probabilities, I think with time to come, this will become a norm. And even the government, for example, the insurance sector regulator, the insurance regulator has said, yes, we should start considering robotic surgeries to pay for the patients for insurance. And now, robotic prosthetic surgery is a gold standard. Gold standard. So is for rectal cancers, at least the low rectal cancers. So I think with time to come, this will become a norm. And I think we have to catch up with the technology, I think.
Sir, I want to know from you, say prostate surgery, which roughly costs about 1 lakh, let us say. What will be the expense in the robotic surgery? One. And another thing is it something like an option that is given to the patient? You want regular surgery or robotic surgery? Is it the patient's option given to him or the surgeon's choice?
Again, sir, fantastic question. I think here we are into the realm of decision making and decision driving. In addition to not risk communication, but communication of financial implications to the patient. So let me take the first question first. I think we believe or we assume that it is always clinician driving the decision making, whether it's about the operation or whether it's about the type of the operation. ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಳ್ತೇವೆ ಕಾಶಿಗೆ ಒಂದು ದಾರಿ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ. In English we say there's no one way to Rome. So what we should tell the patients is, important thing is to take the tumor out. And we also need to emphasize to the patient, it is just not about treating the tumor, it is about treating the person who's harboring the tumor. Sometimes doing nothing, sometimes not doing the operation is the best treatment for that patient. Let me give you an example, gentlemen. We talked about the length of survival, or the average lifespan in India is about 68 years old. Let me take an example from last week. I've had a patient, 85, fit 85, 5 miles a day, non-diabetic, non-hypertensive, ASA1, ECOG 0. She has got a rectal cancer. What do? Would you treat the tumor, the cancer, or would you treat the person with the cancer? A lot of our 50-year-olds are much more unwell than this 85-year-old. So I said to her, Madam, you're 80. You have surpassed the average lifespan of an Indian by 12 years. In fact, not 12, 17 years. She's a lady who was a Commonwealth scholar in the 70s, sent from India to Britain. The British got her in on the Commonwealth scholarships. She said, Doc, now I'm 85. My daughter is alone. She's 45. We are made for each other now. How long can I live if I have the operation now? I said, if you don't do the operation, you might be okay for another 2 years at least. Because by biology, the tumors that are in the elderly are less aggressive. They are slow growing. So I said, you might be okay for another 2 years. In the event that it causes obstruction without distal problems, we can always give you a bag. She said, no doctor, how many years will I live if I have an operation? I said, if somebody is well at 85, there's a good chance they'll be okay at 90. She took that call and she said, I'm going to go for an operation. So I said, look, we can do it an open operation. Your stay will be about 7 days. I can do a laparoscopic operation, about 4 to 5 days. A robotic operation, just about 5 days probably. But I leave the choice to you. And we also offer them an opportunity to go for a second opinion. I said, don't take a decision in haste. Here are my colleagues, you can go and please speak to them and come back to us. So they decided to go ahead with the operation. We did the operation, finished it on Monday evening. 8 o'clock, went to recovery. We do something called as enhanced recovery after surgery. So we don't start the preparation of the day of the surgery. We start it 4 days, 5 days, 1 week, 2 weeks before the operation. It is not about physical optimization. It's about physiological optimization. It's about psychological optimization. What we forget is the psychological state of the patient matters a lot with their recovery. And this is all the science we talk about, psychoneuroimmunology, which is another subject for another day. So we optimized her. Monday evening she went to recovery or ICU. Tuesday morning moved to the ward. Tuesday evening she got, better in terms of the pain, epidural was there. All the tubes started coming out. Thursday morning she was home. Thursday morning. This is what minimally invasive surgery can do. No scars, the extraction site was the stoma site. So I think it is the clinician who has to drive the decision making process. It is not, one size fits all, it's horses for courses. And I think it is our responsibility to say, this is what the evidence is. These are the various treatment options, including the option of not doing anything. And at the end, if you're in confusion, you put your family test. Would I do that if it is my mom, my father, my mother? And if you're right, you're probably right for the patient. So I think you're absolutely right, sir. Clinicians have a great role to play in terms of decision making, communicating the risk, and how we communicate it. I think that was an excellent question. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It's usually a mutual discussion and a combined decision, and judicious decisions have to be taken, and always individualized treatment is always better for the patient. And always when we discuss in such meetings, we always should not confuse or mix up the population approach and the individual patient approach. See, if you ask me what is I will never talk to a population about robotics or any surgery. If I have to give a talk to a general public, I will always tell about healthy lifestyle, avoiding red meat, not to smoke, reduce alcohol, and maintain a healthy body weight, and live long and happy and healthy. But when it comes to individual patient discussion, as sir told and as sir mentioned, there is always a technology which is available, and judicious use of technology is important. It's not that one shoe fits all and apply that robotics to everybody. And robotics is coming to Kidwai now. And imagine even a person from remote village, if he lands up in Kidwai and he is a suitable candidate, lower rectal tumor, young patient, who wants a better quality of life and his sexual function has to be preserved, robotic can be used for such patients. So it has to be judicious use and individualized decision and tailored treatment which is going to make a difference. So we'll
Sir, one second. Sir, these colorectal cancers are very, very rampant and more common in the West compared with the Indian population. What do you think is the reason? Is it the genetics or any specific reason, any other reason more common there? They believe in routine colonoscopy periodically. We don't do that here.
Yes.
It is much less here compared with the West. What do you think is the reason? Is the genetics or any other reason? Or the dietary habits, genetics, what is the reason?
If the moderator is happy, I'll take 5 minutes, but if you're pressed for time, I can answer it later.
Yeah, we'll take only 5 minutes and we'll go to the next two discussions.
Okay, sir. So I think again a fantastic question. Why are we seeing more colorectal cancers in India now? So let us go back to the epidemiological data, sir. What is the incidence of colorectal cancer in an asymptomatic population? ಲಕ್ಷಣಗಳ ಇಲ್ಲದೇ ಇರತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಜನಸಾಮಾನ್ಯರಲ್ಲಿ how many cancers we see? It's about 4 to 5 per 100,000 population. And why we seeing a rise? Environmental factors are the major problem. Sir, ನಾವು ತಿಂತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಆಹಾರ, the food we eat, ಕುಡಿಯತಕ್ಕಂಥ ನೀರು, the water we drink, ಸೇವಿಸ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಗಾಳಿ, the air we are consuming, ನಡೆಸ್ತಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಜೀವನ, the lifestyle we are into, very, very, very troublesome. Tell us, how many of us cook a traditional Indian meal every day, healthy, balanced diet, that we did 15, 20 years ago that our parents did? Please tell me. Obesity, major risk factor for colorectal cancers. Sedentary lifestyle, major risk factor for colorectal cancers. Stress, one of the major risk factors for colorectal cancers. Alcohol, one of the major risk factors for colorectal cancers. And geography has got an answer to play as well. Why do we see more cancers in the northeast of India? parts of Kerala, red meat, tinned fish, dry fish. And if you look at the root cause analysis from the northeast of India, it is the lead in the waters because of industrial pollutants from Bangladesh, from Calcutta, because of the dye industry, because of the garment industry. So certainly a lot of factors, 95% of the risk factors are something that we can change. It is our own making. It is the industrialization. It is the pollution. It is lack of good lifestyle. And we are eating more. An Egyptian proverb goes, a third of what you eat is for yourself, 3/4 is for the doctor who looks after you. So I think lifestyle has got a big thing to answer. That is the reason why we are seeing more colorectal cancers in India. And when you came to the screening you talked about, sir.
Screening,
So
we'll keep it for.
we'll keep it for later for discussion.
Yeah,
We'll
we'll
catch
have-
up while we have food and drinks.
Yeah,
Right,
we'll have one-to-one discussion on screening, because screening again, there are only 3 cancers which have shown survival benefit by screening. That is, one is breast cancer, cervical cancer and colon cancer. Colon cancer we have not discussed because of the lack of time. Because again, it's again a controversial area, whether when to do colonoscopy, at what age and what frequency, what is the role of fecal occult blood test. Again, it will go on and on. So we'll keep it later. We'll move on to the next discussion with Dr. Sunil, who is our oncosurgeon. His area of interest is thoracic oncology. And Sunil, your take on recent updates in head and neck and thoracic oncology. Lung cancer is one cancer which is very difficult to treat, and we may get 1 or 2 patients in a year to operate, because by the time we diagnose, they are already in stage 3 before, and very rarely we get stage 1 and 2 lung cancer patients. And if the patients are not fit enough because of COPD and bad lung function. And the updates, even in head and neck cancers, it has been not much progress. Of course, we have the role of immunotherapy and newer drugs in head and neck cancers, and HPV cancers have come in a big way, where the prognosis is good in HPV cancers in head and neck area. So what are the recent updates in head and neck and thoracic oncology, and also throw us some light on VATS surgeries, and what is the recent update?
Yeah, in thoracic cancers, we mainly deal with esophagus and lung cancers. As Dr. Nasimaya has said, minimally invasive surgeries are coming up in a big way in thoracic also. So, in lung cancers, the extent of resection and the improvement in post-operative survival is increasing day by day. So what were deemed as inoperable and patients who were deemed unfit for surgery are now undergoing surgeries, and the extent of surgery also has increased. Even the locally invasive tumors like the lung tumors which were invading the chest wall, or the vessels like SVC, are all undergoing surgery, and the outcomes are also becoming better day by day. And I think sir would also throw light on the recently upcoming immunotherapies which have improved the quality of life and survival in lung cancer patients. In esophagus also, the lymph node dissection and the recovery has been enhanced by the minimally invasive techniques, that is both robotic and VATS, that is video assisted thoracoscopic surgeries. In head and neck also, the robotic surgeries are coming up in a big way, especially in the areas which were hitherto the realm of radiotherapy, like the oropharyngeal cancers and base tongue cancers, which were initially treated with radiotherapy. Now the small tumors in base tongue are very well operated through the robotic techniques. And also, as sir said, the interest in HPV cancers is increasing in head and neck areas, and we are looking at de-escalation of treatment. Like, since the HPV, the tumors that are there due to HPV have improved outcomes, we are looking to de-escalate the treatment by reducing the use of radiotherapy in some of them.
Yeah, thank you, sir. That was very brief and comprehensive about recent advances in head and neck cancers. We are de-escalating therapies in HPV-induced head and neck cancers because the prognosis is good and the behavior is indolent. And of course, lung cancer is a very difficult cancer to treat. And as he mentioned clearly, immunotherapy has come in a big way. Of course, cost is an issue in immunotherapy. And that is for few select patients who are high PD-L1 positive and MSI high patients. And that we can discuss again later. So there are a lot of things happening in the arena of metastasectomy too. We have even patients with osteosarcoma with lung metastasis or soft tissue sarcoma with lung metastasis who undergo metastasectomy, they live longer and the survival is longer. We'll move on to the next field of discussion, that is radiation oncology. We have with us Dr. Vinay Ural, who is senior consultant radiation oncologist at our hospital. We hear a lot about there is one area which has benefited the most from technological advance, that is radiotherapy, because we see all the recent gadgets with them, and even for any of our queries regarding iPhone or iPad, I always contact Dr. Vinay Ural, and they are the ones who have incorporated the recent advances in the technology field which has happened, because medical oncology and surgical fields, they are lagging when compared to radiation people. And we hear a lot about CyberKnife, targeted radiation surgery, SRS, and TrueBeam, and we have TrueBeam in our hospital. What is the TrueBeam and what's its advantage over other conventional radiation machines? So throw some light on that, and also touch upon the stereotactic radiosurgery which has come up in a big way.
Thank you, Dr. Patil. Coming to radiation therapy, as you know, first thing what is telling about TrueBeam. The main important part of TrueBeam is truly we can see the tumor every day, which is not possible in all the radiation machines. Meaning, for example, you're talking about lung cancer or esophagus cancer, we can see the tumor moving every day and we can target the tumor. So lung or esophagus are always moving, and as the respiration we can target and high dose. Same way we can minimize dose to the heart and other part of the lung. Another advantage of TrueBeam is earlier we were treating 6 weeks for say breast cancer, but now we have reduced the 6 weeks to 4 weeks. And with the recent advances in the TrueBeam, we are even treating within 2 weeks only. So with the COVID pandemic, for breast cancer patients, we can finish the treatment in just 2 weeks, which is not possible in any other machine, even though it may be CyberKnife or any other machine. And next, coming to cervical cancer. As we have been discussing, screening, whatever we do, we are seeing most of the time advanced cervical cancer. And the treatment for this is radiation and chemotherapy. And cervix cancer, as we see, every week it will melt. With the TrueBeam, we can see that tumor is becoming smaller and smaller, and we can minimize the dose to the bladder and the rectum. And that is another big advantage of the TrueBeam machine. Third advantage, I would say, this TrueBeam machine, we can treat the smallest tumor in the brain and also biggest tumor like in head and neck cancer. So all the cancer can be treated in one machine, that is TrueBeam. And another advantage, I'll say that TrueBeam, it is so fast. We can treat the patient in just 2 to 3 minutes, which is not possible in CyberKnife or Gamma Knife. Coming to what I was telling about SRS. SRS is stereotactic radiosurgery, meaning if there is a small tumor in the brain, we will give very high dose and target that area. So ultimately the effect is in such a way that a tumor is destroyed. So we don't need any surgery, it's a OPD basis, and the patient goes home in 1 day. So another advantage of that SRS is, unlike Gamma Knife, scalable and demands, we don't put any screw or anything into the patient. Patient comes on OPD basis, takes treatment and goes home. So that is another advantage of TrueBeam.
Yeah, that's really amazing, because as residents, I remember even in 2006, 2008, we used to see patients with very bad quality of life. They used to have huge radiation fields and severe mucositis, not able to eat, not able to breathe properly, and they used to move around with the junction violet and the PEG tube, not PEG tube, Wells tube.
Yes.
And we don't see that.
All those are very much minimized nowadays with the TrueBeam, because we can minimize the dose to mucosa, parotid, and esophageal mucosa when you're treating head and neck cancers, or when you're treating lung cancer, we can reduce the dose to the esophageal mucosa. All these are possible.
Yeah, the side effects have remarkably come down, and yes, sir.
Sir, this TrueBeam and the stereotactic surgery, these are magic-like treatments we are not able to understand in 1 or 2 sentences. I think that needs a long
that
session.
we'll have a separate
Can you tell us 1 or 2 sentences more? Which are the ideal cases where you do this TrueBeam, like a brain tumor or any specific condition where you do this magic-like treatment? Because this is totally new to us.
Yes, yes.
That stereotactic beam or a TrueBeam or laser beam or whatever it is, we are ignorant of these things. What are the ideal conditions where you use this and how expensive are these treatments?
TrueBeam is like our Ashwin. It can bowl and Ashwin can bowl and bat both. Similarly, TrueBeam can do all kinds of treatment. We can treat a cancer. We can treat a high-grade glioma in the brain. We can treat a benign tumor like acoustic schwannoma. We can treat benign lesion like meningioma. So all those can be treated with TrueBeam. SRS, what is SRS? SRS means stereotactic radiosurgery, meaning if the patient has got a meningeal tumor, the treatment is generally surgery. If the patient doesn't want surgery or it is not amenable to surgery, the next treatment is radiation. So patient comes in one day, we will do CT scan, we will do MRI, we will mark the tumor and treat the tumor with a very high dose. So one day patient takes treatment in 15 minutes, takes treatment, goes home. You repeat a scan after 2 to 3 years, the meningioma has disappeared. That is the biggest point in TrueBeam.
Both for benign and malignant, both.
Yes, that's what I told. It's like Ashwin, our present Indian team Ashwin. He can bat and he can bowl, like that.
The take-home message is, compared to conventional radiotherapy, the present radiation techniques have lesser toxicity and the duration of treatment is shorter, the quality of life is better, the outcomes are better. And basically there are three modalities of cancer treatment, that is medical, surgical and radiation. And newer advances in radiation techniques have resulted in better quality of life and lesser duration of treatment. It is becoming individualized treatment and patient-centric. Previously they used to come every day for 5 weeks or 6 weeks. Now it can be done in 3 weeks because of the advancement in the technology. I am sure a lot of questions will be there and you can interact with one-to-one. I will just ask all our panelists to just say one point each, take-home message from their respective fields. So over to you, ma'am, Dr. Ranibhat. Then all of you can just say one point which you want to drive to the audience, and then we'll wind up the session. Thank you.
I strongly recommend HPV vaccination and also pap smear test, because this is one cancer which we can easily prevent and the incidence is still high. So please, in your practice, please do educate patients to go for HPV vaccination and regular pap smear tests.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Jayanti Tumsi.
So my take-home message would be that as far as breast cancer is concerned, early detection is the game changer. Earlier we detect and we start the treatment, better are the outcomes. There has been a lot of advancement generally in breast cancer treatment. Most of the patients do very, very well with wonderful chemotherapy drugs and radiation techniques. And also from surgical point of view, a woman who has breast cancer need not fear of losing her breast and the femininity. There breast conservation surgery is available, also reconstruction surgeries which are very, very safe. So early detection is what we need to promote, and breast screening, doing breast self-examination regularly starting from age 20 years and mammogram once in a year starting from age 40 years is what certainly would be recommended.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Narsimaya, sir.
Sir has said just in one line, it's very difficult to do that. But anyway, I will try. So I think the cause and cure for every ailment we see today, whether it's cancers or non-communicable diseases, lies in the mother nature. I think we need to look after her. How do we do that? Try and protect the environment so that we don't harm her. In the process, get ourselves fitter. Be the change you want to see. You tell the patient lose weight, let us start with us. You tell the patient not to smoke, let us start with us. And be aware of the symptoms of the disease process. For colorectal cancers, anemia, especially iron deficiency anemia, rectal bleeding, change in the bowel habit, right upper quadrant mass, rectal mass, abdominal mass. Any of these things, get them to a clinician, get them to a surgical or a medical oncologist or a radiation oncologist for assessment and treatment. Early cancers picked up, we are looking at cure rather than looking at non-curable disease. That's what I would say. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Vinay.
I think the take-home message would be radiations really changed the way patients have been taking treatment. The quality of life has improved. we are trying to increase the cure. However, we will be very happy if we can see more patients in early stage so that they can live longer with a better quality of life.
Thank you. Dr. Sunil?
The outcomes in thoracic cancers have increased by leaps and bounds. So whatever cancers were deemed to be inoperable or untreatable, most of them can be treated nowadays. So kindly send them for proper evaluation. Don't write lung cancer off, because even stage 4 adenocarcinomas are amenable to immunotherapy also.
Thank you. I thank all my elite panelists.
Sir,
All have stressed the
I
fact
want to
of...
make a small comment, sir.
Yes, sir.
It is a wonderful session, sir.
Yes, sir.
Compared with the
I was about
regular,
to come for that.
regular PowerPoint presentation, 30 minutes talk given to each speaker, and imagine if there are 5 speeches, at the end of it, we'll be totally flat and
Yeah.
will not, it doesn't enter the head, it enters only the ear.
Thank you,
So
sir.
this is a wonderful session.
Thank you, sir.
But listening to all these talks, I thought I can make a comment.
Yes, sir.
In the treatment of cancer patient, I was writing down here. I wrote here wage, age and stage. Let me repeat, wage, age and stage. Wage, I am talking about the money part of it. How much money the person is earning or family is earning. That is the age. I am talking about the economics also. Wage is money. Age is what is the age of the patient at the time of diagnosis. Say suppose at the time of the diagnosis somebody is 40 years, the treatment is different. Somebody is 70, it is different. Somebody is 80. Sir was telling somebody 90 years. So what is the wage, what is the age and what is the stage? First stage, removed, totally cure. Second stage, think twice. Third stage, fourth stage, somebody is 70 years. Family income is not good. He is a retired person. So wage, age and stage. We have to take into consideration all these 3 things. What is the wage, I mean the income. What is the age at the time of diagnosis? What is the stage of the disease? And what is the impact of treatment? How long he is going to survive if he is not treated? If treated, what is the survival benefit? What is the quality of life? What is the money he is going to spend? What is the impact? How good is the quality of life with medicine? Without medicine, with chemotherapeutic agents, with radiotherapy, what will happen to his quality of life? What is the survival benefit without compromising the quality? I think all these things have to be taken into consideration to arrive at a conclusion which is suitable, which is unsuitable. So I think it needs a combined decision of all the consultants involving the practicing doctor who has referred the case to come to a decision, and we have to talk to them. And it is a mediconomics, medicine and economics to be clubbed together, arrive at a decision and decide the right treatment. This is the comment I would like to make, sir.
Thank you, sir. That was superb. And that's what experience speaks.
Yeah.
So, sir has summarized oncology practice. Why oncology? The whole medical practice in 3 words: the wage, age, and the outcome. What we have to see. He has summarized it in very.
Age and stage.
Yeah, he has summarized the oncology practice in 3 words. I would say. I thank all my elite panelists.
Just before we end, I think the whole program has been designed by Dr. Patil, and a big thanks to him for doing such a wonderful job. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. I thank all my elite panelists because they have reiterated
And we
again.
have one more session coming up dedicated for Dr. Patil, because we left behind the medical oncology. We didn't discuss much about medical oncology today.
Yeah, so medical oncology is the newest kid on the block in oncology, because the radiation, surgical was the oldest and then came radiation, and medical was the is the recent one. And all have reiterated and stressed the fact that we have to detect the cancers early, and we have to individualize the treatment, and we have to look at the quality of life when we make treatment decisions. And I will be failing in my duty if I don't thank you. You have come in big numbers and have listened patiently. And I also wanted feedback, as sir gave his feedback regarding the pattern of the program, because I don't believe in this didactic talks. I always say ours is not PowerPoint presentation, ours is power-packed presentation. So this way, the audience interaction is more, and people don't see WhatsApp and Facebook when we are interacting. Suppose somebody puts up the slides and talks, I'll go to the WhatsApp mode or Facebook mode. That's what everybody else would do. But if you are interacting and if you are answering the questions which you face every day in your practice, then it is more meaningful. What's the point in telling what is the incidence of breast cancer in US or gynecological malignancy in Europe? Doesn't make any sense. So I'm sure a lot of you will have a lot of questions. We will interact over dinner and fellowship. And I thank all the audience. And if there are any comments from all the senior physicians here, please comment about the pattern of program what you had and what the take home message what you had from this program. Please, if you can share your experiences in another 5 minutes.
Sir, I have a suggestion. It's a wonderful thing, but it should not start at 8 PM or 9 PM. It should start in the morning at 9 o'clock. It should go up to lunch time so that you will get about 3 to 4 hours time and the speakers can speak for about 10-15 minutes and then you can have a question answer session. It should be long half a day session, not 1 hour session packed into 1.5 hours. It is not possible.
And definitely it should be longer, and all the panelists also would have felt that they didn't have enough time, and I also was hurrying them up. So we'll have a longer session another day. Any other comments from the audience?
Probably take literally 30 seconds. We are really grateful for Dr. Patil because he's not only a medical oncologist but a poet too. ಒಂದು ಕವಿತೆಯನ್ನು ಬರೆದು ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ ಅವರು. I think he's a great poet and great organizer. We will be not doing justice if we don't thank our marketing team. They have put a lot of effort to put this together. Vishwanath, Chandrasekhar, Narayan Murthy. I think we should give them a big hand too because without them this wouldn't have been possible. Thank you.
So, thank you one and all. We'll move for fellowship and dinner. Thank you.